My grandfather purchased this ranch in 1953 with money saved from fighting in Korea. 200 acres of rolling hills, a natural creek cutting through the eastern pasture, and enough space to raise both cattle and a family. I grew up learning every inch of this land, where the best fishing spots were, which hillsides bloomed with wildflowers in spring, and how to mend fences that protected our livelihood. When my parents passed, the ranch came to me, along with all its memories and responsibilities. Most people in Clearwater County know me as James Mitchell, the county land commissioner, but out here I am just Jim, a rancher trying to preserve a family legacy. I deliberately keep these two parts of my life separate. At work, I wear button-down shirts and attend meetings about property disputes, zoning regulations, and development permits. At home, I wear worn jeans and boots caked with honest dirt, tending to 50 head of black Angus that represent 4 generations of careful breeding. The morning ritual never changes. I wake before sunrise, make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and walk the eastern fence line as the world awakens around me. The cattle recognize my footsteps and begin moving toward the feeding area. This connection to the land centers me before days filled with paperwork and politics. Here, I find peace that no corner office could ever provide. 10 years ago, the first houses of Whispering Pines appeared on the ridge overlooking my north pasture. A development company purchased Old Man Wilson's failing orchard and transformed it into an upscale community with uniformly beige houses and perfectly trimmed hedges. Year by year, phase by phase, the development crept closer to my property line. The original developers had been reasonable, maintaining proper setbacks and respecting boundary lines. But 6 months ago, everything changed. The homeowners voted in a new HOA board led by Richard Coleman, a retired executive from Houston who brought big city tactics to our rural community. Suddenly, there were complaints about cattle odor, demands for visual improvements to my weathered barn, and disapproving glances when my trucks kicked up dust on the county road we shared. I could have thrown my weight around, mentioned my position, brought up the regulations I enforce daily. But that has never been my way. My grandfather taught me that a man stands on his own merits, not his title. Besides, I value my privacy and the separation between my professional and personal life. Most of my neighbors have no idea what I do for a living, and I prefer it that way. Last Tuesday changed everything. While checking fence posts along the creek, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Bright orange survey stakes had appeared overnight, forming a line that cut 20 yards into my property. These were professional markers, the kind used by development companies before construction. What troubled me most was their placement. They formed a line that would cut off access to the creek that provides water for my entire herd. I pulled one stake from the ground and examined it. No official county survey tag, no professional marking. Just the letters WPHOA scrawled in black marker. Standing there in the morning light, watching my cattle drink from waters that had nourished this ranch for generations, I felt the first tremor of what would become an earthquake in my peaceful existence. The next morning, a procession of 3 luxury SUVs rolled up my gravel driveway, disturbing the quiet rhythm of ranch life. I watched from the porch, coffee cup in hand, as 5 people emerged dressed in business casual clothing that looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of my weathered barn. I recognized Richard Coleman, immediately tall, silver-haired, with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Good morning," I said, remaining seated as they approached. "This is an unexpected visit." Coleman gestured to a woman beside him holding a leather portfolio. "This is Patricia Winters, our HOA secretary, along with board members David Chen and Michael Roberts. We also brought Gary Simmons, our development consultant. None offered to shake my hand. "We are here to discuss the new community expansion," Coleman said, his tone suggesting this was a formality rather than a conversation. "As you may have noticed, survey markers have been placed for the new fence line." I took a slow sip of coffee. 20 years of handling land disputes had taught me the value of measured responses. "Those markers are well inside my property line. Has there been a new survey I am not aware of?" Patricia stepped forward, opening her portfolio to reveal a colorful map. "According to our records, the boundary line was never properly established when the original development was built. Our research indicates the Whispering Pines community actually extends to the creek bed." "That is interesting," I replied calmly. "I would like to see the documentation supporting that claim. My family has owned this land since 1953, and our deed clearly establishes the boundary along the old county road, not the creek." Coleman smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "We have filed the appropriate paperwork with the county. This visit is merely a courtesy to inform you of the adjustment before construction begins next week." "Construction cannot begin until property lines are legally established," I pointed out. "I will need to review your documentation and compare it with my records." "Of course," Coleman replied with a dismissive wave. "Have your attorney contact ours. But understand, Mr. Mitchell, that this decision has already been approved by our board. The community needs water access for our planned recreation area, and the fence will be going up as scheduled." After they left, I spent the evening in my grandfather's old study, pulling out yellowed property maps, the original deed, and survey documents from county archives I had brought home years ago for safekeeping. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The boundary was exactly where it had always been, and the HOA's claim was completely baseless. The next morning, I drove to the Whispering Pines clubhouse, dressed not in my official capacity but as a neighboring landowner seeking resolution. The receptionist eyed my boots and jeans with barely concealed disdain before directing me to a conference room where 3 board members sat waiting. Coleman was noticeably absent. "We appreciate your concern," David Chen said without looking up from his tablet, "but our legal team has advised us that our position is solid. The original development plans always included access to the natural water feature." "That water feature is a creek on my property," I replied. "I have documentation dating back 70 years proving ownership." Michael Roberts, a thin man with narrow glasses, sighed dramatically. "Mr. Mitchell, perhaps you are not understanding the situation. Whispering Pines represents 96 homeowners and millions in property value. The board has determined this expansion is necessary for community growth." "And what about my rights as a property owner?" I asked. Patricia Winters closed her notebook with finality. "We suggest you consult with a real estate attorney. This meeting is concluded." Driving home along the dusty county road, the setting sun cast long shadows across my pastures. As I crested the hill overlooking the creek, my headlights illuminated something that made me slam on the brakes. Construction equipment, an excavator, a bulldozer, and a truck loaded with metal fencing materials sat at the edge of my property line. They were not waiting for documentation or legal confirmation. They were moving in immediately. The sound that woke me was not the familiar lowing of cattle or chirping of morning birds, but the harsh mechanical growl of heavy equipment. I jumped from bed, not bothering to change out of my sleep clothes, and rushed outside. The sight turned my blood cold. Under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, an excavator was already digging post holes while workers unloaded sections of industrial fencing. The line of construction cut directly across my eastern pasture, separating nearly 40 acres of grazing land and the entire creek from the rest of my property. I sprinted toward the nearest worker, heart pounding against my ribs. "Stop, this is private property. You cannot build here." My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. A foreman in a yellow hard hat approached, clipboard in hand. "Sir, we have permits and authorization from Whispering Pines HOA for this installation. All the paperwork is in order." "Whose order? Certainly not mine, and this is my land." I gestured to the pasture around us where my cattle were now gathering nervously at the unfamiliar noise and activity. The foreman looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Look, mister, I am just doing my job. The work order comes from Coleman Development, contracted by the HOA. They showed us permits and boundary documentation. Take it up with them." "Those permits cannot be valid," I insisted, professional knowledge bubbling up despite my attempt to keep my official role separate. "No county office would approve construction on disputed property." The man shrugged, sympathy in his eyes but determination in his stance. "I do not make those decisions. I just follow the work orders. We have been told to complete this fence by tomorrow evening." A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I surveyed the damage already done. Post holes punctuated my land like wounds. The fence would cut off my cattle from their primary water source and isolate nearly a quarter of my usable grazing land. This was not just an inconvenience. It was an existential threat to my ranch operations. I returned to the house and changed clothes, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Years of professional training kicked in as I grabbed my camera, notebook, and measuring tape. I spent the next hour documenting everything, photographing the original property markers, measuring the encroachment, recording the equipment license plates and company names. When Sheriff Dawson arrived an hour later, I had compiled enough evidence to file 10 different complaints, but his response crushed what little hope I had for immediate intervention. "Jim, I understand you are upset," he said, thumbing the brim of his hat nervously, "but this looks like a civil property dispute. My deputies cannot halt construction without a court order." "Tom, they are building on my land without permission," I argued, struggling to keep my voice level. "That is trespassing at minimum." "They have paperwork that says otherwise," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "Conflicting claims make this a matter for the courts, not law enforcement. I suggest you get a lawyer involved right away." By afternoon, the fence had taken horrific shape. 8 feet of industrial metal cutting across land that had been open range for generations. My cattle gathered at the barrier, confused and increasingly thirsty as they were cut off from the creek they had always used. I would need to bring in water tanks immediately and make arrangements to move them to the south pasture, but that was a short-term solution at best. That evening, I drove to the Whispering Pines clubhouse where the monthly HOA meeting was scheduled. Perhaps addressing the full board and homeowners might bring reason to this situation. But at the security gate, I was stopped by a guard I had never seen before. "HOA meetings are for residents only," he stated flatly. "This meeting concerns my property," I explained. "I need to address the board about the fence being constructed on my land." "No exceptions without prior board approval," he replied mechanically. "I have strict instructions." Through the clubhouse windows, I could see Richard Coleman at a podium, gesturing toward a large projection screen showing what appeared to be development plans. When he noticed me at the gate, he paused mid-sentence, then smiled coldly before continuing his presentation with renewed vigor. I waited in my truck until the meeting ended, hoping to catch board members individually. As attendees filed out, most avoided eye contact. Finally, Coleman emerged, flanked by the same board members from before. "Mr. Mitchell," he called out with artificial cheer, "security mentioned you were waiting. Is there something we can help you with?" "You know exactly why I am here," I replied, working to keep my voice steady. "That fence is illegal. It cuts through my property and violates multiple county ordinances." Coleman's smile never wavered. "If you believe that, I suggest you hire a lawyer, if you can afford one." He looked pointedly at my weathered truck. "Large legal battles can be quite expensive for individual landowners." The others chuckled as they climbed into their vehicles, leaving me standing in the parking lot as darkness fell. Driving home, my headlights illuminated the new fence gleaming in the darkness, a metal scar across generations of family heritage. The following morning, I called in sick to the office for the first time in 15 years. This situation required careful handling, and I needed trusted advice before proceeding. I contacted Maria Vasquez, the county environmental inspector who had worked alongside me for a decade. "Jim, this is outrageous," she said after I explained the situation, careful to present it as a hypothetical property dispute without revealing it was my own land. "If what you are describing is accurate, they have violated at least 3 different ordinances just with the fence placement." "What would you recommend for the landowner?" I asked, maintaining the pretense that I was seeking professional advice for someone else. "Document everything. Check for water rights violations since the creek is involved. And look into the HOA's development history. Entities that pull stunts like this often have a pattern." That conversation sparked an idea. After hanging up, I called Deputy Commissioner Franklin and requested a personal day to handle family matters. With my schedule cleared, I drove not to my ranch but to the county record's office on the other side of town where fewer people would recognize me. For hours, I combed through records of Whispering Pines development, beginning with the original permits filed 10 years ago. What I discovered revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 times in the past decade, the HOA had expanded beyond their approved boundaries, each time against smaller landowners who lacked resources to fight back properly. The original developer had followed regulations, but when the HOA took over management 5 years ago, things changed. Setbacks were ignored. Buffer zones were built upon. Environmental reviews were filed with questionable data. Most concerning, water management plans were completely inadequate for the development size, explaining their sudden interest in my creek. None of these violations had been flagged because the HOA submitted modifications piecemeal, each change small enough to fly under regulatory radar. But viewed comprehensively, the pattern was unmistakable and deeply troubling. That evening, I returned to the office after hours when the building was nearly empty. Using my secure access, I downloaded every permit, variance, and inspection report related to Whispering Pines. The evidence was damning. Not only was their claim to my property completely fabricated, but much of their existing development stood on regulatory quicksand. Meanwhile, the situation at my ranch deteriorated rapidly. With the creek inaccessible, I had to bring in water tanks at considerable expense. The cattle, creatures of habit, gathered daily at the fence, mooing plaintively at the water they could see but not reach. I contacted my cousin Bradley, who owned property 30 miles south, and arranged emergency grazing rights, knowing I would need to relocate my herd if this situation continued. Loading the first trailers with confused cattle was one of the hardest things I had ever done. These animals represented generations of careful breeding, animals that knew this land as home. Now they looked at me with bewildered eyes as I guided them up metal ramps into unfamiliar trailers. "I will fix this," I promised them, feeling slightly foolish for talking to livestock but needing to say the words aloud. "This land will be whole again." By week's end, my ranch stood eerily quiet. No lowing cattle, no movement across the pastures that had never been empty in 70 years. I allowed this visible defeat, knowing that appearances would matter in what came next. Let the HOA believe they had won. Let them grow confident and perhaps careless. The certified letter arrived exactly as I anticipated. Thick cream stationery with the Whispering Pines logo embossed in gold, containing what they called a generous settlement offer for the disputed acreage. They offered 20% of market value for 40 acres of prime ranch land and water rights that had been in my family for generations. The letter closed with a deadline, accept within 10 days or face further legal measures. I placed the letter in a folder alongside the growing evidence of their violations. The time for playing the simple rancher had passed. They had taken my land, threatened my livelihood, and now sought to legalize their theft through intimidation. What they failed to understand was that they had not targeted just any landowner. They had unknowingly challenged the very person most equipped to understand the full scope of their violations. I did not respond to their letter. Sometimes silence is the most powerful reply, especially when it precedes action. Instead, I made 3 phone calls to the county surveyor, the Environmental Protection Office, and the district attorney. The trap was set, and Richard Coleman had no idea he was already standing in it. The Whispering Pines clubhouse buzzed with activity that Thursday evening. Through discreet inquiries, I had learned they had called an emergency board meeting to discuss expansion opportunities. From my car parked across the street, I watched homeowners file in, dressed in casual business attire, many looking excited about whatever announcement was planned. I waited, timing my entrance carefully. In my passenger seat lay a briefcase containing everything needed to end this situation definitively. For this confrontation, I had abandoned my usual ranch attire. Instead, I wore my official county uniform charcoal suit, burgundy tie, and the gold badge of office that identified me as Clearwater County Land Commissioner. At precisely 7:30 p.m., I made a call to confirm my colleagues were in position. Then, straightening my tie, I walked across the street toward the clubhouse. The security guard who had turned me away days earlier did a double-take at my transformation but did not move to stop me. The county surveyor and environmental inspector followed close behind, each carrying official documentation. Through the clubhouse windows, I could see Richard Coleman at the podium, gesturing enthusiastically at a projected image of my eastern pasture, now transformed in digital renderings to show tennis courts and a community swimming pool surrounding my creek. The audience applauded as he described expanded amenities for all residents. "The rancher has gone silent," I heard him say as I approached the meeting room doors. "Our attorneys believe this indicates acceptance of the inevitable. By summer, this eyesore of a cattle operation will be transformed into the recreation center our community deserves." I pushed open the double doors. The room fell silent as every head turned toward the U. Unexpected interruption. Coleman froze mid-gesture, his presentation remote suspended in air. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I apologize for interrupting, but there seems to be some confusion about property rights and county regulations that needs immediate clarification." Coleman recovered quickly, his politician's smile returning. "Mr. Mitchell, this is a private meeting. If you wish to discuss our offer, you can contact our attorneys during business hours." I approached the podium area, my colleagues flanking me with their official binders and equipment. "I am not here as James Mitchell, rancher," I replied, removing my county identification and holding it up for all to see. "I am here as James Mitchell, Clearwater County Land Commissioner, and this is now an official investigation into multiple violations of county land use regulations." The blood drained from Coleman's face as murmurs rippled through the audience. Board members exchanged panicked glances as I placed my briefcase on their table and opened it. "For those unfamiliar with the role," I continued, addressing the homeowners directly, "the Land Commissioner oversees all property boundaries, development permits, and land use regulations in the county. My office approves or denies every construction permit, boundary adjustment, and zoning request." The county surveyor stepped forward, unrolling official maps on the table. "These are the legally registered property boundaries for both Whispering Pines and the Mitchell Ranch, recorded with the county since 1953 and never legally altered. The fence your HOA constructed cuts approximately 800 feet into Mitchell property with no legal basis whatsoever." Coleman attempted to interject, but I raised my hand. "Additionally, the environmental inspector has identified critical violations regarding water rights and riparian protection zones. The creek is classification a watershed, protected against precisely the type of development shown in your presentation." I turned to face the homeowners, many looking shocked and concerned. "Beyond these immediate violations, we have identified 27 additional permit irregularities in Whispering Pines development going back 5 years. These include building on required setbacks, exceeding density limitations, and filing falsified environmental impact statements." The environmental inspector distributed official violation notices to each board member. "These are cease and desist orders, effective immediately. All construction must stop, and the illegal fence must be removed within 48 hours." "This is absurd," Coleman sputtered, his composure cracking. "We have approvals for everything we have built." "No, Mr. Coleman, you do not," I replied calmly. "My office has no record of approving boundary adjustments against my property, nor permits for fence construction across a protected waterway. What you do have is a serious legal problem." I closed my briefcase with a definitive click. "To be absolutely clear, you have 48 hours to remove every post of that fence. After that, county crews will remove it at Whispering Pines HOA expense, along with any other structures found to violate county ordinances. Furthermore, all development plans are suspended pending full regulatory review." As I turned to leave, Coleman grabbed my arm. "You cannot do this," he hissed, voice low enough that only I could hear. "This is a conflict of interest. You are using your position to protect your own property." I looked down at his hand until he released me. "No, Mr. Coleman. I am applying the same laws to you that apply to everyone else. The conflict was created when you tried to steal land from someone without bothering to discover who they were. That was your mistake, not mine." Walking out of the suddenly silent clubhouse, I felt no satisfaction, only resolve that justice would finally be restored to more than just my land. The reaction from Whispering Pines was immediate and desperate. By 9 the next morning, 3 different law firms had contacted the Land Commission office requesting emergency meetings. My assistant, Susan, fielded the calls with professional detachment, scheduling them for the following week as per normal procedure. There would be no special treatment, no rushed exceptions. By noon, Coleman himself appeared at my office, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. I invited him to sit across from my desk, where framed certificates and awards made my authority in these matters abundantly clear. "This is all a misunderstanding," he began, his tone conciliatory where it had once been condescending. "Our development committee received incorrect information about boundary lines. We are prepared to remove the fence immediately and discuss proper compensation for any inconvenience." "This goes beyond incorrect information, Mr. Coleman," I replied, opening a folder containing photographs and documentation. These are satellite images showing the progressive encroachment of Whispering Pines developments over the past 5 years. Each instance involved taking land that did not belong to you, building without proper permits, and ignoring environmental regulations. He leaned forward, voice lowered. "Listen, Commissioner, mistakes were made, certainly. But surely we can resolve this without involving the entire community. Many homeowners had no knowledge of these irregularities. That is precisely why I am proceeding officially rather than privately," I explained. "Those homeowners deserve to know that their HOA has been operating outside the law, putting their investments at risk. Transparency protects everyone except those with something to hide." That afternoon, under county supervision, construction crews arrived to dismantle the fence that had divided my property. Each post removed felt like a small victory not just for me, but for proper procedure and rule of law. My cattle would return home soon. What I had not anticipated was the ripple effect through surrounding properties. As news spread about the Whispering Pines violations, other landowners began coming forward with similar stories. Martha Winters, an elderly widow whose garden had been partially paved for a Whispering Pines access road. The Jensen family, whose private drive had been blocked by unauthorized landscaping. Each complaint revealed the same pattern of aggressive expansion and disregard for property rights. The county investigation expanded beyond my initial findings. Financial audits revealed that HOA funds had been misappropriated for legal fees associated with these land grabs. Building inspectors discovered corners cut on safety requirements. Water management plans were found to be wholly inadequate for a development of that size. Most damning was the discovery that Coleman and 2 other board members had established a separate company that purchased adjacent properties at reduced prices after HOA actions had effectively devalued them. They had been using community authority for private gain, a clear conflict of interest that crossed into potentially criminal territory. The district attorney called me personally. "Jim, this investigation has grown beyond land use violations. We are looking at fraud, misappropriation of funds, and filing false documents. The board members could face personal liability and possibly criminal charges." 1 week after my confrontation at the clubhouse, a public county meeting was scheduled to address the Whispering Pines violations. The county meeting hall overflowed with concerned homeowners, nearby property owners, and local media. I sat not at the center table as land commissioner, but in the front row as an affected property owner, recusing myself from official decisions due to my personal involvement. Deputy Commissioner Franklin presided, methodically presenting evidence of each violation with corresponding regulatory citations. The audience gasped at aerial photographs showing the progression of boundary violations over time. Coleman and the board members sat ashen-faced as their development plans were systematically dismantled. "These restrictions are not punitive," Franklin explained to the gathered homeowners. "They are simply the regulations that have always existed, regulations your HOA leadership chose to ignore. Moving forward, all Whispering Pines development will require enhanced supervision and transparency." When homeowners began shouting questions about potential impacts on their property values, Coleman and the board faced the direct consequences of their actions. The community they claimed to serve now viewed them as liabilities rather than leaders. As the meeting concluded, I watched silently as the newly appointed County Oversight Committee outlined strict requirements for Whispering Pines, moving forward requirements that would have been unnecessary had they simply followed the rules from the beginning. The HOA that had once operated like a private fiefdom would now function under the most stringent regulatory supervision in county history. The early morning sun cast long shadows across my eastern pasture as county surveyors installed official boundary monuments. These concrete markers, embedded with brass caps bearing county certification numbers, would ensure no future confusion about where my land ended and Whispering Pines began. I watched from horseback, my most faithful companion Dusty shifting beneath me as workers carefully placed each marker according to the original deed descriptions. These will be registered with GPS coordinates in the county database, explained Head Surveyor Jenkins. Anyone checking records in the future will have absolutely precise boundaries, no room for interpretation anymore. Where the illegal fence had stood just weeks before, fresh soil now covered the scars. County environmental specialists supervised the restoration of the creek banks that had been damaged during the fence installation. Native grasses were replanted, erosion controls installed, and the natural flow of the waterway protected with science-based buffers. What surprised me most was not the official response, but the community one. That Saturday morning, trucks and cars began arriving at my front gate, not HOA members, but neighboring ranchers and townspeople I had worked with over the years. They brought tools, materials, and willing hands. "Heard you got your land back but needed some help with restoration," said Bill Henderson, a cattle rancher from the next county over. "Figured what those HOA folks tore down, we could help build back up." Throughout the day, volunteers rebuilt sections of interior fencing, cleared debris left by the construction equipment, and helped prepare the pastures for the return of my cattle. Even more surprising were the handful of Whispering Pines residents who came to help, introducing themselves as new homeowners who had been unaware of their HOA's actions. "We bought here for the beautiful countryside," explained Jennifer Adams, a young mother who had moved in just months earlier. "Not to destroy it. Some of us are working to completely restructure the HOA after learning what happened." The following Tuesday, I hosted the first landowners' rights workshop at the county meeting hall. What I had expected to be a small gathering of affected neighbors became standing room only. Ranchers, homeowners, and even real estate agents filled every seat, eager to learn how to protect their property from encroachment and understand the regulations governing land use. "Knowledge is your first line of defense," I told the assembled crowd, sharing lessons from both my professional experience and personal ordeal. "Know your boundaries, understand your rights, and document everything. Land disputes are won not just with emotion but with evidence and procedural correctness." Meanwhile, Whispering Pines underwent its own transformation. The county commissioners appointed an oversight committee to monitor all HOA activities for the next 5 years. New leadership was elected after an emergency vote of no confidence removed Coleman and his allies from power. The development plans were completely revised to respect natural boundaries and environmental protections. As part of their settlement with the county, former board members were required to deliver public apologies and participate in community service projects restoring natural areas they had previously damaged. Watching Coleman plant native saplings along the creek bank under supervision, hands dirty for perhaps the first time in his corporate life, provided a different kind of satisfaction than mere punishment could have. 6 weeks after the confrontation at the clubhouse, my cattle returned home. I opened the trailer doors and watched them move cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence back onto familiar pasture. They made their way directly to the creek, drinking from waters their ancestors had enjoyed for generations. That evening I sat on my porch railing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and purple. The land stretched before me, unbroken now by artificial barriers. My grandfather's words came back to me. Land is not just dirt and grass, Jim. It is history and future all at once. Your job is to hold it in trust, neither diminished nor damaged, for those who come after. The fence that was meant to divide had indeed transformed our community, but not in the way its builders intended. Property lines were now clearer, regulations better understood, and neighbors more aware of both their rights and responsibilities. As darkness fell over the ranch, I realized that sometimes justice requires not just knowing what is right, but having the patience and courage to stand firmly upon it, regardless of the challenge.